Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club, where we dive into the details of Christopher Ruocchio's Sun Eater universe. I am your hunchbacked, heterochromic, intis host, Cameron. And with me, as always, as he is teaching the people that I'd like to get close to the real way to fight with a sword, the Palatine host of our podcast himself, Drew. How are you doing, Drew?
I am doing fantastic, and today we're going to be covering chapters 50 through 52 of the first book of this series, Empire of Silence. I'm excited to continue. We're getting into more...
We're halfway done, dude.
Yeah, we're making it through. We're getting some, like court sort of political stuff going on, relationships and stuff. It's getting good.
Yeah, super excited about the rest of the book. We got to plug and chug to get done with this. I can't wait to get on to the rest of the series. That's how excited I am, how excited this part of the book's now that it's picked up.
Yep.
It makes me. But can you give us a brief recap of what we discussed last time?
Yeah, so in the last episode, we are greeted with a sort of lamenting Hadrian, sort of recounting the fact that he's feeling very stuck by his situation. We get to see the Ephebia happen, where the Cielson is actually executed, the Cielson that Hadrian had communicated with. And then we also get a ending section where Hadrian is reintroduced to Polino and gets to try to sort of resalvage their relationship and communicate through him towards Switch that he is sorry, to see if that there was any way to mend that relationship. So a lot of talk about relationships and stuff like that in the last episode.
And that's where we pick up with him in chapter 50, which has two different names depending on which version of the book you have. So I believe chapter 50 in the original version is called Without Pretense, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, yes.
In the new version of the book, it is called the alienage, which I'll remind our listeners, an alienage is a ghetto for non-human Xenobites in the Stolen Empire. So it gives us the new name gives us an indication of what's going to happen. Hadrian immediately begins, steps off of a ship that has taken himself, the Mataro kids, and Valka to this Umand alienage. And in doing so, he's being very quickly and very early on in these chapters. We've talked about it before, but the political guile or the willingness to be subservient for his ends and understand where he is in the situation, Hadrian is displaying that more and more and more the further we get in the book. This isn't fumbling around with politics of the Mandaris. This is Hadrian observing every single form that he needs to stay alive. And in doing so, he helps Dorian and Anais off the ship, gives them a hand. His boots are covered in water. And we get a really, really interesting character building moment for Valka, because he really is doing it. Let's be honest. He's doing it so that he can hold Valka's hand. He's just observing the fact that he has to do it for Dorian and Anais. But the real benefit of him is like, oh, maybe I'll get to hold Valka's hand. She slaps it away immediately and jumps in the water and starts walking away. She's awesome. We get a vision of Valka in these chapters that are really, really enlightening into who she is as a person.
We just continue to get this developing sense of strong personality for her. And she, we're getting this sense that she sort of bucks the system socially and culturally, being from where she's from and now being in the Empire, disagreeing with things very forcefully. But we're also getting this sense through this that there's sort of this almost independence to a fault, where she sort of scoffs at efforts to help her in some way. It continues to give shape to who this person is. Yep. It's quite charming, actually.
So these soldiers wearing Mataro livery begin clearing a path for them between, you can imagine as they step onto this beach, there's a lot of Umand being driven around by duelators, like we'd seen with shock sticks and those big machines with the dials making the noises, trying to tell them what to do. And actually, these duelators line the Umand up for an inspection. So this is almost a military thing. The moment that the kids of the count show up in town, every bow has got to be tied and every button's got to be buttoned up and all that different stuff. It's not a formal inspection, but just the fact that the count's kids are here, there's a formality to this that wouldn't necessarily be present otherwise. This alienage is at a place called Ulakil, and I couldn't find anything on that name, but it does mention that this island is rare because it is a volcanic island, one that was created and existed before the tectonic death of Imesh. So we knew that Emish was tectonically dead, but at one point it was tectonically alive, and that's where this island, there's not a lot of landmass on Emish, and so these islands are sort of few and far between, and they also are, the land fluctuates in periods we already know based on the fact that Valka's not at Kalaga, that tidal forces essentially, or weather or other factors block off certain land masses from being habitable for certain periods of time. Valka points to this palisade in the water as Hadrian is inspecting the fact that there's this house where this leader of this area lives, and getting a lay of this island. He looks out into the water and he sees this palisade, which is a fence in the water. And Valka mentions that this fence is superheated to specifically melt any organic matter it comes in contact with. So this is keeping the Uman from leaving. They're in a cage surrounding this island or this beach, and they are being fenced off from otherwise being free in the water, because we know that they're amphibious. They could be on land or in water. They would otherwise just be on the bottom feeding or whatever. Upon seeing that, Hadrian feels this gut feeling of how awful this is. And then Valka sort of turns this on him like she has with the gladiatorial stuff, saying that, you know, it's your empire that's doing this. It's like, this is your fault, like lumping him in with the rest, which, you know, just sticks right in his craw more than anything else. He's tried his very hardest to distance himself, at least internally, from the empire up to this point.
Yeah, it really triggered some thought process for me when I read this line, because there's sort of a weird thing that's happening here where Hadrian responsibility for the empire sort of placed on him. And I was thinking about this, about whether or not that's fair or not. And it's sort of hard to evaluate in some sense, right? Because Hadrian is different than the rest of his empire, but he benefits from existing within it. So it's like a weird situation where there's really kind of unclear lines of responsibility here. You know, like, is it the obligation of a person who exists within and benefits from this environment to like tear the thing down in order to somehow not be like responsible for something like this? Or is he just an innocent bystander that was born into it? Or figuring out precisely where it is kind of complex thus far. You know, he's said words that suggest he disagrees with it, but it's sort of unclear what your obligations are within an environment like this, and whether or not it's yours or just something you live in.
I was going to bring this up later, but I think it might make sense to bring it up now. Two things. One, Valka is more right than she knows that he has more say, or would have more say in the social structure than most people if he were to just be a Palatine, right? Because he is a Palatine, and he is benefiting most from the society, like you're saying, but he also has the most say. The Palatines have of anybody in the society. You know, obviously, Chantry, Emperor up here, Palatine's right below, right? He's one rung from the top of this society, and most Palatines have, I don't know, some semblance of power, right? They have power over the plebeians. She doesn't know that he's Palatine because of his cover,
Right.
but she knows that he's higher up than a plebeian, and she's saying this. The second piece of it that I wanted to mention is the demarquee in particular. We get an explanation of this in a later chapter, in chapter 52. The culture that she is coming from, she is a governmental figure, right? Everybody in the demarchy is a governmental figure.
Yeah.
Demarchy in particular is a system of government in which like the entire populace is pulled from, and different groups maintain different pieces. So like there's a transportation group, and there's a farming group or whatever. So there may be a bunch of different things. In the manifestation in Tavros, every single person is a member of the government. So they all have equal share to any problem that's going on. So the fact that she's bringing up to him, she's looking at it through the lens of, well, where I'm from, is equal to blame for anything that goes wrong as my neighbor, right? Like it's everybody's problem all the time. It's also everybody's say to change anything, right? A true sort of weird democracy in this manifestation.
It's really strange, you know, because in a situation like Valka's, you divide responsibility up so much that you have some control, be it small, like in an environment that we live in, we have some control, but it's small, but we still bear some responsibility. It's just unclear about like what the implications of that are. In an empire that Hadrian lives in, where he doesn't have that kind of representation, it's strange, but yet again, he's a Palatine. So what does that mean? Like, does he have true ability to completely buck the system, or does he get crushed by the Emperor if he does so? And if he does, then like what's the obligation? It's really complicated figuring out like how much you can blame Hadrian for this situation or
Yeah.
put that blame on him. And yet Volka sort of like innately does it. And it will be interesting to see as their connection and just relationship or whatever it is continues, if the criticism stands or not, and if this sort of reflex that she has continues. So lots of interesting thoughts about this dynamic.
The Villicus of this island begins to greet the Mataro children and the rest of the group. A Villicus his name is Niles Engen. A Villicus is basically the chief overseer. He's the boss of the duelitors. It comes from the Roman word for manager, supervisor, or overseer. So he's the one who's basically responsible for the maintenance of all of this ghetto. And the moment he sees the Mataros, he's very polite. He's like, "Oh, sorry, Lord Mataro, that I couldn't be at your Ephebia. I saw it on video. I heard you were very gallant." And he's just, brown-nosing the entire time.
Yep.
And the moment he lays eyes on Valka, he's like, "Oh, yes, you must be the Tevrosi." And he's just like immediately flips, right? He makes the sign. I think it's the first time we hear, maybe the second time we hear of the sign of the sun disk, which we should let readers know is essentially the equivalent in this universe of crossing yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's a warding gesture that Mother Earth, like the sun disk would be Sol, like the original our sun that we live under today here on Earth. It's a warding gesture away from evil. We'll get a little bit more context about why that is in the not too distant future.
One thing that stood out to me here immediately as this happened, where Volka is dismissed and sort of like called by
second-class citizen,
right, is that this may be our first clue that Volka's assertive nature is an adaptation to the way that she is referred to. If you can imagine, if she's this Tevrosi xenologist that goes out into the world and is treated this way all the time, one could see either people being crushed by the sort of discriminatory attitude of people, or to develop an opposite reflex of being very forceful and assertive back to advocate for oneself, maybe even overcompensating in that sense to signal that she can't be pushed around in order to survive in an environment where she's not in her home culture this way.
I think that there's part of it that's just her, right? Her
yes,
strong-willed nature. But that's a good point. That's a fair point. The other part of it too, though, is going back to the idea of the demarquee, because she is, 1x percentage of the government of the demarquee. She's also a foreign dignitary at all times. So they can be rude to her to a certain extent, but they can't be so rude to her that it like immediately cuts ties with anything that they want to do business with the demarquee. So she's afforded some liberties that otherwise she would not be, because she is technically a foreign dignitary. But that doesn't mean that people have to treat her nicely, to your point. And so maybe that brusqueness is a learned behavior, but it's also afforded by the fact that she can get away with it.
Yeah. Just for clarity's sake, I think it's important, assertiveness is an adaptation that people can have. It's also the environment matters. If being assertive just got your head cut off, you're correct that maybe she wouldn't do it. But also assertiveness is a personality trait. There's a subtrait of, I believe it is, of extroversion is assertiveness. So it is a genetic thing as well. It is likely that regardless of environment, she would have been a strong-willed person, but it's possible that that instinct sort of grows in an environment like this due to the ability plus the necessity for her to be so. So interesting things.
They look over at these interconnected huts of rusted metal, which is this, I mean, it's a shanty town that has been constructed by the Umand.
Yeah.
And Engen mentions the fact that this might be the most populous version of these alienages on all of Imesh. But because it's a shantytown, it's not it's not up to code. It's not meant for people to come and go look at it. So he's probably organized, and we get kind of a picture of that in just a minute, of, different things. They're going to go to this side of the town where it's relatively safe, and this side of the town where it's relatively safe. As they begin to survey the Umand and see them in this habitat, I won't say their natural habitat, but in this habitat itself, Hadrian mentions that Imesh's two moons, which we have had a tell of before, they make the tidal forces crazy on this planet. And so that's why we have Caliga being an issue and the storms being so big. On top of that, like the water cycle's got to go crazy with 2 moons and 2 tidal forces. I could not help but keep every single time we get anything related to Imesh, it is in stark contrast to everything Hadrian was on Delos, right? Delos was placid. It didn't have a moon. It was grayscale and dark. Imesh is bright and vibrant and blue and green, and it's hot and it's not temperate, and it has 2 moons, and so tidal forces are crazy. Balian Mataro is this man of passions. He has this charisma. People want to get to know him. He's the count of this land, whereas the Archon, Alistair Marlowe, is cold, calculating, rules only by fear. So even in the ecology and the world building of the celestial bodies of Imesh, we are seeing a stark contrast between Hadrian's past and Hadrian's present. Mm-hmm. One of the moons is green and is named Bina. This greenery is potentially a reference to Book of the New Sun. I'll leave that for people to go and read that book. I'd recommend everybody do it. It's great. But the name Bina comes from the Hebrew word for understanding. It's a divine attribute or emanation on the Kabbalistic tree of life. So there's the fact that he chose this name is not by accident. There's deep references to esoterica and mysticism that may potentially even tie it closer to Book of the New Sun. You may think I'm going down to the rabbit hole.
No.
You got to read Book of the New Sun and maybe it'll make sense.
No, I just think it's interesting that Hadrian goes from placid planet to planet where he is then crushed by understanding. I think it's fascinating. Oh. Yeah. I didn't even think about that, but he almost drowns on this planet in part because of that's really fascinating. That's an interesting. I'm not sure if that's intentional or not, but it's this is a coming of age story. He comes to the planet, and the intensity of this planet is partly its nature, and it's funny that one of the components of that is understanding.
Yeah,
that's
wow.
At the minimum, a really amazing coincidence or a brilliant part on the part of the author here. I'm not sure.
And that ties back to what we've been saying about this new Hadrian that we're seeing has been crushed by that understanding that you mentioned. What genius, dude.
Yeah.
Genius.
It's pretty amazing.
This is why we do this.
Yeah, this is correct. Yeah.
That's awesome. The other moon that we don't see visible in this scene is a white moon named Armand. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything related to Kabbalah in the name Armand, but there may be something I missed there. As they wait, this alienage is like partially submerged, right? Imagine like knee-deep water is what it sounds like. Valka is walking next to Hadrian, and she just remarks, they're a marvel in cognitive mystery, and yet all you guys do is have them fishing. Right? Like, what a waste. We could be studying these people. We could be understanding them more. And you just got them fishing off the coast. And Hadrian, while they're talking about the Umans, still has this very, very vivid picture of Makisom's head in Dorian's hand as it's being held aloft by Dorian. Every time Valka is mentioning the Umand and the treatment of the Empire, like, Hadrian is scared to look at her as almost an admission of guilt on his part.
There was this moment that I think is interesting when she says, it's a damn waste that these Umanda are like this, and Hadrian agrees with her. And there's this line where he's just like, sorry, I can imagine him walking next to her and he feels her eyes like looking at him.
Yeah.
And it's this moment that to me feels like she is looking at Hadrian and calculating and trying to reassess a little bit, is like, who am I talking to right now? Like, it's like, this is like it's got to be a very disorienting experience. Us as the reader, we've lived with Hadrian since the start of this narrative. Hadrian is super weird for being someone in the Empire, right? He's saying that he agrees with, like, they're in a slum currently in his empire, and he's saying, this doesn't make any sense. And she's like looking at him like, what is this person? She's like, doesn't fit into any pre-existing model that she has, even though she has this, previous section of criticism. It's your empire, Hadrian. He starts saying comments like this continually, and she sort of looks at him sideways like, is this his empire? That's the kind of the feeling that is evoked for me.
That's fair. And it's also probably to her probing, like pushing a little bit to find where the button is, like Hadrian's button is. She knows that at least up to this point, he's been very polite with her. He hasn't been rude to her. And I imagine for some of that, it's rare. I mean, we saw Gilliam Vas be such a jerk to her in last episode, right?
He like called her a whore or something.
Yeah, called her a heretic whore and all this different stuff.
Yeah.
From her perspective, he's not at the highest level of society, but the fact that he is as nice as he is might be putting her off guard. And so she's trying to figure out where his levers and buttons are. Hadrian, as he's watching the Umand work, notes that they are like ants working in unison, guided by one of the Umand's songs. And at the same time, the Vilicus is regaling them with the fact that they are now sending Umand off-world for the first time. And Dorian makes a note of the fact that this is the first time hearing it. I didn't know we shipped them off-world. And Engin mentions, yeah, but, they're House Coward on Triton believes that they'd be good at laying wiring on seabed potentially. But the Vilicus mentions that I don't think they can even screw in a light bulb, which is, fun fact, exactly what they were doing the moment
I know
that Hadrian meets Valka.
This guy is super gross. I don't like this guy. Gives me bad vibes the entire time. It just feels all wrong.
It doesn't get better because Hadrian then pipes up, of course, and says, so you were a traitor then. And by traitor, he means a slaver, right? Yeah. And so Hadrian has clocked this guy's modus operandi because that's his business, is dealing with Xenobites in particular. And Engin mentions that, I used to deal the Kavarad from Set al Sud to other planets. The definition of Set al Sud in the lexicon, in the Index of Worlds, is a wild world in the spur of Orion that is mostly untrammeled, home to the Kavarad giants, a huge species of Xenobites, as well as the Marching Towers, one of the 99 wonders of the universe, ruled by House Rodolfo.
Man, the appendix here is just like, it's just so cool. It's underappreciated.
Dude, just wait, because we find out that these giants, these Xenobites that are native to this planet, grow up to 40 feet tall and are nominally immortal. So we don't know how old they can possibly get, even though they are 40 feet tall, and yet they are enslaved by the Solan Empire. On top of that, the planet Set al Sud is a real supergiant star system that is also known as Beta Aquarii in our universe. We could see it from our Earth. And Set al Sud, it's either the Arabic or the Farsi name for this planet, for whoever. It might have been the Arabic name for the astronomers who discovered it, but it means the luck of Lux, and it's 540 light years from Sol. The depth at which this guy deals with these planetary bodies, the reason I look all this stuff up is he has put in plenty of work. And that's probably my biggest question is, it's clear that there's some sort of method to the madness of how he names these planetary bodies, some of which this already exists. Set al Sud already exists. It just has a different name in English. We call it Beta Aquarii, but some people still call it Set al Sud in our world. But for other planets that we don't know, how he goes about adding these pieces in, I really want to get some more context for, because the layers to it are really deep.
Well, it's also just what's so fascinating to me about it is that this is a depth of world building that I think most people are not even going to digest, including myself, because they don't read the index, right? They're not going to see this random factoid about this location. He didn't have to do this. Yeah. And yet he did, and it just adds. It's just super cool, man.
Every time he does it, it may not amount to much.
Right.
But in the total collective, it amounts to an incredible amount of depth and reality in world building. Because even if we never see, or we do see, a Kavarad giant or whatever, right, whether or not that's a setup for later, it doesn't matter. Hadrian, the narrator, is interested in it because he loves Xenos, right? We've already established that. He's here at this ghetto looking at Xenobites. So he would know this information because he's fascinated with all the 40 Xenobite creatures or species that they've found.
Super cool.
This is that depth of thinking that most of us would not get to when writing a story.
Yeah.
Hadrian also mentions that the Kavarad had been popular in previous years in Colosso, 100 years before, pitting them against a team of Myrmidons, which I wish we got that scene of Hadrian and Polino and Switch and
dying
Siren
to a Kavarad.
fighting against a 40-foot tall giant. It'd be crazy. But as you know, as he's thinking about this and hearing that Niles Engin was a slaver of these giants, Valka clearly shows her displeasure and begins like muttering to herself and walks away, and then gets her tablet out and starts interacting with the Umand. So she is like playing on her tablet, trying to communicate with them. She points to wind chimes, or what look like wind chimes, to Hadrian and asks him his opinion on what he thinks that they are. Nobody really knows. It's potentially a religious symbol, but a religious symbol would indicate more intelligence than the Umand have shown. Valka mentions that she wishes that she could ask him, and Hadrian's like, well, just use the tablet. You have a translator right there. Why can't you just talk to them? And she's like, they don't understand. Their communication is not language like we would understand language. The Umand harmonize in different frequencies to accomplish tasks. Collectively, they are smarter as a pack or a unit, but not by much. So like she mentions the case of like one of them drones that they're hungry. And so all of them go and get food together and like harmonize with that tone of being hungry until all of them are fed. And then they move on to another task. This sort of gives me vibes of like the way bees work. Yeah. Or hive mind kind of animals, things like the ants, you know, pheromones and different things that people are guiding different functions for. Mm-hmm. So it's not like she could just be like, hey, Umand, why did you make this?
Right.
So they would. That's the first time Hadrian's heard this about the Umand itself.
Yeah, it's not language like the Cielsen have. Right. The Cielsen have complex, like, verbal language in the way that we do. The Umand have, like, vibe songs, and they, like, connect in that way, and they do things very complex, interesting. It's a sort of a separate phenomena from language. It's communication, but language may be a strong word for it. It's not. It doesn't have grammar. It's, like, frequency and stuff. It's very fascinating.
And Hadrian, in talking about these frequencies, asks how many of them that we know collectively as a human species, and she mentions like a few dozen, so 24 to 36 of these frequencies they understand, but there's potentially more out there. But to your point, she then flips that conversation on him and said, you know how rare it is that language develops, like grammar develops as we conceive it present in the universe? And of course, Hadrian, being the smartass, is like, well, I'm exactly 1 in 25. And she's like, don't be a freaking smart ass, dude. And she sort of is now letting him in on some of the things that she's thinking about when dealing with this. This is her work as a doctor that she's doing right now, is postulating, trying to gather intelligence and information about how these different things work. She mentions a theory that she read by Philemon of Neruda called unnatural grammars, which is the fact that the Cielsen and humanity have the structure of a grammatical language is what allowed them to eventually become spacefaring creatures. The way that their brains were wired because they had grammar is a direct, like, causal reason that they eventually ended up developing ways to get off world. That's the theory by Philemon of Neruda. But just as a note, he is a scholiast from the planet Neruda. Neruda is a reference to Pablo Neruda, who's a Chilean poet, and this planet is known for having a fungal forest and a scholiast Athenaeum. Philemon is a book of the Bible, and this is an interesting factoid too. The name from Greek comes from love, the word love, philos. It's a Pauline epistle, so meaning that the Apostle Paul wrote this letter to Philemon, and it's included in the biblical canon. But interestingly enough, the book of Philemon is Paul writing to Philemon, telling him that his once bondservant or slave Onesimus is coming back, and Paul wants to greet him as a brother. So the fact that like he chose Philemon as he's talking about the Umand is not accidental. They're enslaved, and Philemon is a biblical book about about, I don't know what you'd call it, abolition, right? Abolition of slavery, like the removal of the status of being enslaved to a person, to an individual. Just thought that was interesting.
That's wild.
Of course, Hadrian is familiar with Philemon of Neruda's theorem, and he just gets super nerdy about this whole thing. And she's like, "Oh, you know, this is exactly what I was thinking about." Blah blah. You know, just kid in a candy store when talking. Yep. This is the first time on the page he's been able to nerd out with somebody about this basically since Gibson, we can imagine.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We've had different pieces of Hadrian connecting with different people at this point. We've had Polino and Switch and Old Crow and all these different connections, but he hasn't had a connection like this since Gibson. We had Cat who appreciated his stories and stuff, but this is like an appreciation for the exact things that he's obsessed with about communication
On an
and
intellectual
language.
level.
Yes, not just a wonder level. He can actually converse and intellectualize with this person in a way that he can't with anybody else since Gibson.
Part of it too is the fact that it's weird. Like, according to the Empire, it's weird that he's into this stuff.
Correct. Yeah.
It's borderline heresy that he speaks the Yeltsin tongue.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's interested in these languages and he's found somebody to, vent the pressure a little bit with it is great. Valka then mentions that, Philemon's theory is very interesting, but his sample size is too small. It's a hypothesis at best, but it has potential. And they're sort of like finishing each other's sentences. It's a very cute moment. Clearly a flirty moment too.
Yeah.
We've been flirting and all this different stuff, but now we have similar interests. She says to him that he's catching on well for a Branthandum and then calls him Anarian. We don't get much context into this word, but Anarian will come up a lot, and we will, when we get a better definition of it later in the text, I'll let you know. But it won't be the last time you heard Anarian or Anariok or some variation of the sort. And Hadrian doesn't know what these words mean, but he can tell that she's razzing him when doing it, but almost in a sort of playful, to your point, a playful, strong-willed and trying to catch his, trying to figure out his buttons way.
Banter, yeah. This is like the girl bullying you because she kind of likes you. That's what this is.
Every dude's fantasy, a little bit. Hadrian, as they shift the topic, is like, well, okay, then what does the tablet do then? Why can't you just, like, if you have these frequencies, can you not coax some information out of them? And she's like, have you ever tried to tell a cat what to do? And he's like, no, we didn't have cats on Delos. They don't exist. And we get a fun little world building fact that they're not on Emesh either, or if they are, they're hidden away because these ornithons, these flying serpents, would eat them. Which is, I wonder if Rockio hates cats. But that was a funny little thing. Oh, it's awesome. But she then takes it to the next level of this language discussion, saying that their consciousness operates on different principles than what we would understand.
It's a fascinating question, right? Because when we think and we experience things in language in some sense. It's very interesting. I was reading a book actually yesterday that referenced another book, and it was referencing Helen Keller's early experience in life after having lost, sight and hearing, and just the experience of like what her life was like before language.
Mm-hmm.
And it was described almost as like this like memory void where there was just like nothing but like experience until she learned what the language for water was, because someone was insisting on teaching her and running water over her hand, and apparently learning just the word to orient her then changed her entire life, because then you could build upon everything else. And so it sort of begs the question of like, is consciousness and the way that we experience it really like interlinked with language and the way that we experience it? And if language were different, would that mean you are absent a conscious experience, or do you just have like such a different conscious experience that we wouldn't even know what that experience would be like? It would be very interesting. Our lives are sort of narrative and language oriented in some sense, and it's almost impossible to imagine what it would be like to live as an Umand, for example. So you wouldn't even have words to describe it. It would be an experience that we couldn't have data for. It's interesting. It begs the question about a lot of things about what do they experience and what is it like, and is it the same or similar to our experience?
You're 100% right. Therapy for me is a language exercise most of the time. It's finding the right words to adequately describe an experience, to see where my brain got to that place, to try and redo that loop.
Yeah. There is a genuine problem for some folks for their difficulty in experiencing their emotions and experience if they don't have the words to describe them. And some people genuinely don't have the words, and so they can't correlate their physical and emotional experience without language. And it happens in people in that way, in some sense, where we are dissociated from our experience without the words for it. So absent language in its entirety, I don't even know what that would be like. I don't know how you would be conscious
Yeah.
and not have it, but it's an interesting question. I don't know what it's like to be in a mod.
As Hadrian is looking over, he sees Engin and Anais feeding these Umand children candied fruit from like a paper bag, and Anais is laughing or whatever. She's getting a very catered experience to this whole ghetto, whereas he's seeing the reality of the situation. Then they look at this bag that these Umand had made and hung from these hoops that are connected to the ceiling that are braided with shells and stone, and they clack softly in the breeze. And they're postulating why they would have made them, discussing their consciousness more. And then they realize that it's a communication tool. The Umand don't have sight, so they echolocate, right? And although this noise isn't loud to humans, presumably it is loud enough for them to hear it. So it's a way for them to be guided potentially through a particular area is via these wind chimes. Hadrian then postulates that it's potentially an anaglyph, which is a carving of a three-dimensional picture that are meant to be felt and not seen. So to your, there's more, references there to how without language and without sight, somebody is to experience the world. Valka is incredibly impressed at the fact that he figures it out that quickly. It apparently took the Normans, decades to figure that out. Hadrian mentions that these circles are like perfectly circular. It's not like kind of circular. No, it's like a perfect circle for these, which is rare that you'd see. And then asks if the ruins at Kalaga have runes similar, is there similar structures or glyphs or whatever there? And Valka says, no, they're made of stone, which is strange enough to be in this landscape at all because everything's like built on coral reef. And the Umand are not, they're building shanty towns right here. I have a hard time believing that their past selves were industrious enough to make stone ruins. Valka is distracted during this conversation because she sees an Umand who's bearing scars from Engin's group or Engin himself beating them and like chiseling their skin out, which is a new layer of cruelty that we haven't seen up to this point.
It's just jacked up, dude. It's so messed up, the treatment of these. It's weird to have a discussion about whether or not these things are conscious in the way that we are, but also to experience the disgust at the cruelty towards them. I think it's worth commenting on something that I think is interesting around this, which is that sometimes we characterize actions in terms of whether or not they're good or not, in terms of if they are harming something else. And I think that is one way to view ethics. But I think another thing to consider is, even if the Umand were not conscious in the way that we are, is there something unethical about the person inflicting the harm, not independent of whether or not it harms the Umand? It sort of suggests an underlying cruelty to the person, that they sort of lack the empathetic instinct towards these things in order to inflict that harm. There was an interesting thought experiment that we talked about in my undergraduate for my philosophy minor that was on this question about like whether or not something has to harm something else in order for it to be unethical. This is sort of jacked up, but there was this example of like, if you walked into someone's home and you discovered that all of their furniture was covered in what appeared to be human skin, would you feel better about it if you knew it weren't real human skin? Like, would you think there's nothing wrong with it? Or would you still think that there's something deeply wrong with the person, not because they've hurt anybody, but because they have this desire to reflect harm or something like that? And it sort of evokes this emotional response, which is that independent of whether or not the Umand are conscious in the way that we are, so we can still draw a conclusion that there's something probably like ethically wrong with the person that would think it's so callously okay to inflict harm upon something like that. So interesting to think about. But the imagining of chiseling something's in this, it's hard to imagine what it would require from a person to be able to inflict something like that. So that separate from the Umand, it's that has to be a pretty amazing level of emotional suppression or psychopathy, right? It would be pretty unbelievable to do that.
Or, I mean, I don't know if dehumanization is the right word, but like...
Yeah.
But even still, to your point, even if the Umand aren't as conscious as a dog or at the dog, like a level of a dog's intelligence or whatever, hurting a dog is something that is vastly unethical and I think would hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
Maybe some less than others. There's cultural mores to be included in this too. Cultural upbringings.
Yeah.
Hadrian feels sick when he sees this as well, and he mentions in Latin, so this guy knows Latin, homo homini lupus, which is man is wolf to another man, which is interesting to note because of the fact that man is the wolf to the Umand here, but also, it's also mentioning the fact that Hadrian is looking at these duelators as wolves among sheep, for instance. Valka is really, really upset at the fact that she's seeing this and saying that they've gone a step too far. You, Anaraic, are obsessed with pain. Another variation of the word that we heard earlier. She blames the chantry. She calls him gladiator. And smartass Hadrian, being really, really understanding in this moment, doesn't correct her and sees an opportunity to share his inner self with her and says, you're right. What they do, what the chantry do is vile. And I wanted to read something that's on page 341 in this book, particularly about this. There must have been something in my voice, a gravity. I clamped my jaw shut, suddenly afraid of saying too much or that I'd already said too much. I wanted to say more, to tell her about my father, about my duty to the chantry. But that was Hadrian Marlowe's duty, and I was Hadrian Gibson. For a moment, we were like two puzzle pieces whose owner understood that they fit together, but could not see how. Had we a day or even an hour, it might have been different, and all her lingering antipathy for me might have washed away. But it was not meant to be. I thought 'twas against your laws to say such things, she says. For a moment, we were like two puzzle pieces that were meant to fit together, whose owner understood that they fit together, but could not see how. This is a clear indication that the relationship that he has with Valka is going to be one that is bigger than we have.
Yeah.
And we've already gotten rumblings. This is the first more explicit indication from narrator Hadrian that him and Valka have a very special relationship, whatever it is, in the future.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he would say not two puzzle pieces that were meant to fit together.
Yeah. Yeah, it implies almost like a divine level of there's something almost perfect about the way they just, at this point in the story, are sort of just not understanding what their connection is yet. They're talking past each other in a certain sense because of the context of what's happening. He's not completely open with her because he's bound by the fact of what's happening. She doesn't know fully about it. There's like a distance that's created by circumstance. But if they could just have time to correct that, then all of a sudden everything would click into place. It's a great analogy to describe what's going on.
And it has to be underlying values based too, right? Because the thing that they bond over is the cruelty of the games of Colosso, which Hadrian still believes is a thing, despite the fact that he fought as a Myrmidon. He still believes that they're inherently bad. And the cruelty of the Xenobites and the cruelty of the Chantry in particular, right? All these three things are things that Hadrian up to this point has mentioned are of utmost importance to him from a value standpoint, and she is the only person he has met that agrees with him on those three things. So of course in that moment he's thinking, I want to be near this woman and get to know her better.
Yeah, the most important part of this section is the idea that he's saying it's vile what they do. She says, I thought it was against your laws. And he says, it is blasphemy to be heard saying such things.
Yes.
And it's this moment of clarity, I think, that they get to share. It's very brief, but it's this him, I think, subtly trying to communicate to her that he gets it and he completely he's not okay with this in it, not just a superficial way. He deeply disagrees with it. And I think also it sort of speaks to the, it's the theme that's partly been coming up throughout this story is the level of supervision in this world. I mean, it's borderline dystopia, like what we're talking about. And the care he has to have with his language, given the position he is in, is different than the care that she has to have given her position and the fact that she's foreign, she's a foreign dignitary. She can't be condemned in the way he's in a very compromised position, but can't talk about it in a similar way that he sort of constrains trying to recoup his relationship with Polino and the Myrmidons. He's similarly hands tied here, although he is able to reach her a little bit with this comment because they've sort of gradually snuck away a little bit. So, and key moment,
key moment for their relationship. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And he's so down bad because he's like, I understood Shakespeare's impulse to be a glove. And that's a reference literally to Romeo and Juliet. where Romeo is looking upon Juliet and says, "Oh, to be a glove upon that hand." So Hadrian is quoting Romeo and Juliet, looking at this woman. He is young, he is dumb, and he loves her. He is obsessed with her.
There was one more line that I think was important that I forgot to mention, which is this idea of you can say them if they don't catch you, and if you can say them, you should. It's
Interesting line.
It rang like 1984 vibes to me. It's like these like small rebellions. Spoilers for 1984. There's this really important moment at the start. Read 1984, folks, where there's like this interesting rebellious moment where a character just writes his thoughts, and it's like a genuine like tiny rebellion of the situation that he's put in. And it feels like that's almost kind of what Hadrian is saying here in some sense. And it's almost an answer to the question that we started this episode with, which is that, do you bear responsibility for the empire here? And Hadrian is almost saying, if you have the opportunity, given the circumstance, to resist even in a small way by saying that this is not okay, it's your obligation to do so. Like, and it's a failure. And in fact, the not doing that, the silence, we might say, sort of leads to this sort of quiet and moral quiet that is described early in the story, where people are not saying the things they should be saying. And I think that's almost the crux of the point of part of this book, is the lack of speaking truth to the situation here and to the cruelty of what's going on is part of the reason it continues. And it sort of all comes together in this moment.
From there, that one moment where Hadrian is pondering and, living in the Shakespearean Romeo and Juliet moment, is as quick as that came, it's dropped off on his head, because he immediately gets awkward trying to explain that he's not like everybody else in the empire. So not only, which is the big indication to her that, to your point, who is this guy? Why have I not met anybody like him?
Mm-hmm.
And in this very sweet moment, she closes the gap and lays a hand on him, and with a sad smile says that she knows that he is different. And then they snap back to reality and begin discussing the ruins and how the Umand wouldn't build them. Specifically, Valka says they didn't, which we get a cliffhanger on this, because she is pondering before she says this, like whether or not to let him in. She like chews on the idea of letting him into her thoughts more. And then she says, yeah, the Umand didn't build Caliga. And the moment that happens, Anais like jumps into the scene, and Hadrian like jumps up sheepishly, because he knows that he's not supposed to be with this girl all by himself.
First of all, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Like it's like a giant question mark, and we just move on. Like it's good writing.
But we can assume that this is the truth, that they did not. Valka believes that they did not. The language discussion earlier in the chapter, the fact that the Umand have built this like crappy shanty town and don't have anything, more industrious, like big stone buildings or whatever, is an indication that maybe they did not.
Yeah.
So we just get left with that pin for the time being, a big one, as Anais, like bull in a china shop, comes and finds Hadrian and Valka off alone, and Hadrian is very sheepish, and it's like, oh yes, I was just hanging out with the doctor, discussing blah blah blah. And Anais tries to shrug Valka off and says, don't you have some shots to give to the Umand or whatever? Valka's like, I'm not that kind of doctor. Dorian pops up behind his sister, and they like, their clothes are like water treated, so they're hydrophobic, and they look totally out of place in this crappy shanty town, which triggers Hadrian's memory of Saltus the homunculus, and the idea that the Palatine caste and the Palatine people are less than human, inhuman, children of the tanks, cousins to the homunculi, to the extrasolarians even. This is the first time we hear that. It's like the extrasolarians are being lumped into this anti-humanism as well. The plebeians are really human. The Palatine, the homunculi are not. And the moment like they have this reunion in the shantytown, Engen barges in and says, get out, because it's a liability. If this thing falls on the two Mataro kids, he's screwed. So he's like, get out of this building. It's not safe. We have to get out of here right now. And as they're leaving, Anais glares at Valka in a very, very telling way. Anais was glaring at the doctor as if she'd caught her stealing her contraband midway to her purse. I wondered at that moment, but I dismissed it when the Palatine girl seized my hand. You must come see the primitives. The Villicus is going to have them dance for us. I shot Valka a besieged expression, but the doctor only looked glassily back at me, that hard-edged smile catching in me like fish hooks. There is a competition happening between these two women and an ownership on Hadrian's part that Anais feels that Valka is infringing upon.
Yeah, I mean, this is the loudest it's been on the page. It is like megaphone loud right here, right? I mean, this is the glare and then the like, haha, let's go, come check this out. Like, it's like, this is not even subtle at this point. Like, there's something going on here, and she is not liking Valka. She feels threatened by Valka, like very 100%. Obviously so. Yeah.
But that's where we end chapter 50 and move on to chapter 51, Familiar. And maybe we get some more information on that in this chapter, spoiler alert. Hadrian begins the chapter as he is tutoring the Mataros, specifically Dorian at this moment, in Jadian. So they're having a conversation in Jadian, and not only that, they're talking about Colosso in particular, his story where he had beaten the gladiatrix Amore of Mira. He's recounting that story to Dorian in Jadian as he is drawing with charcoal a portrait of Dorian in a gladiator outfit. And Dorian's like, that's super good. Like, where did you learn drawing? Like, in Jadian, he's talking to him, and Hadrian's like, I took up drawing because my dad said sim goggles weren't holy, pointing at Anais, who's over in the corner playing sword art online, basically. And saying that, this hobby is better. It's a holier hobby, and Gibson agreed that it's more of a classical passion than pure escapism.
There's this moment also where Anais turns to Hadrian, and Hadrian comments on how she's intentionally bending over in front of him or something. Is weird. He turns away and is shy about it. Remember, Hadrian's ethic around women is he's not a fan of this kind of a thing. But it sort of continues to happen here. Again,
as Dorian asks her to come look at this picture.
Yeah. They once again start going at him about whether or not he's gonna go back to Colosso or anything. You should be a gladiator. He is sort of a little bit more open about the fact he's guys, if I go back, I'm gonna have to fight my friends. My friends are the Myrmidons, and I think it's Anais makes this comment that it won't be that way for long, which is crazy callous.
But she catches herself. She does recognize after the fact very quickly that she made a mistake. But yeah, she does say that, they're probably going to die soon.
Yes. Yeah. It's still messed up. Hadrian continues to expand upon the fact that he is not a fan of Colosso. It sort of mentions maybe that Valka's view has influenced his view of Colosso. He's very critical of it. And again, Anais is not happy Valka is mentioned. She says, must we talk about the Tavrosi? She's clearly jealous of her. It's built upon from the previous situation. And as they're talking, it starts to dawn on Hadrian that Valka is here temporarily. As a reminder, she is visiting because of the seasons flooding the ruins at Caliga, right? And so eventually these are going to go down and they'll return. And it sort of occurs to Hadrian in this moment that, this is my crush is going to leave. This becomes a big issue.
Dorian in particular begins a line of dialogue. It's wait, they don't have the Colosso and the Demarchy? And Hadrian doesn't know how to answer this because he's not really read up on culture and how it's kind of different over there. Anais, it brings up the fact that they're machine worshippers. They are heretics. Gilliam calls her a witch who gave herself to the machine. She's not human anymore. And Dorian is clearly feeling differently than her, because Anais is really animosity, really angry with her or frustrated with her. Clearly, we can see on the page, with the context that we have, she is jealous. And Hadrian, we're getting a picture now that Hadrian is specifically a pet for Anais Mataro, because Dorian doesn't feel this way. He has a lover that he hangs out with. maybe there's a potential for him down the line too, but like there is something going on here with Hadrian and Anais that they are intended to be set up for one another. Whether it's to what ends, we do not know, but we know that Anais's father has put Hadrian, like Anais has the keys to the cage. Hadrian's her pet, not Dorian's pet, kind of Dorian's pet, but not really Dorian's pet, really Anais's pet. And she's pissed that another woman is ruining that because that's not the way it's meant to be. She's used to getting everything her way.
Dorian, it just is twisting the knife all over the place in this conversation. Just like, yeah, Volka's great, dude. Like, she's gorgeous.
Hot,
don't you think? Yeah, and like, it's just like, bro, like putting Adrian in this really terrible position. Number one, I don't get the sense he would even do this like weird locker room talk or anything like that. Yeah. But it's also in front of Anais, which puts everyone in a weird position and just makes it awkward because I guess Dorian is completely socially inept about this or something.
Or he's intentionally doing it to his sister. One of the two.
Yeah, one of the two.
Hadrian just like spit takes. He also indicates in his conversations that on the sly, he's been going to her room to look at ruins and talk and whatever. And he mentions that, oh yeah, she's a brilliant xenologist. Did you know she's been to the tomb of Simeon the Red on Giudecca? Like, she's been to Giudecca. Clearly, Hadrian does not want her to know that she's been hanging out with Valka as much as she has. Right. So Hadrian's now getting keyed in on the idea that Anais is upset at the fact that he has a close relationship with Valka. And she just says, I don't even know what you see in her, an off-worlder like that. And he's like, I'm an off-worlder too, your ladyship. Dorian just in his own world is like, you think Dad will let me fight in Colosso? And then Anais has an idea. She's like, you should teach us to fight. Hadrian's like, wait, don't you have somebody who's been teaching you since you were young? It's like, yeah, but he's not that good. He was Gibson for them, teaching them languages and like kind of a semi-Scholiast tutor. He has now been pigeonholed into also being their Felix, like being their combat instructor as well.
Right. He sort of gets cornered by social convention here. It seems like he's like, I don't think it's appropriate for me to refuse a Palatine their request in this circumstance because of his position. And so he is sort of asked something that he can't refuse and ends up having to actually do this, which is, it feels like something he does not want to do, frankly.
Yeah. And what they also mentioned, like their sword master's not that good.
Yeah.
We need a better one. And we cut in this scene to Dorian complaining, but why do we have to train outside? You have to imagine it's worse training in Imesh than it is in Delos, for instance, just because of temperate weather or whatever. But Hadrian's a very disciplined person. Like he trained without shoes for like the better part of 20 years every single day in sword fighting. And that's how he became so good as he is. And it has allowed him to survive. And not to mention the fact that he also trained in Imesh in the same conditions that they're training in, worse conditions theoretically than when he was training as a Myrmidon. And the moment that these Mataro kids are out there, they're complaining.
Yeah, they're soft, especially Dorian, which it's just like he's just
this is the guy who had the Sealson head in his hand.
He's just being so whiny, it drives me crazy, and he's being kind of rough with him. Like he's just like, listen, guys, like this is what has to be done if you want to be good at this. And Hadrian also comments on the fact that they actually are poorly trained, so they weren't like just lying. Apparently their sword master is actually just not that good. Hadrian starts explaining like, oh, you need to be, if you're going to be in Colosso, listen, dude, like you're going to be in these conditions. And Dorian says like the most obnoxious thing I've read in this book so far, which is that the gladiators' suits are water cooled, which is just like jumped off the page, is so disgusting to me.
Yeah.
That this kid is trying to get out of harsh training because he's going to be in this perfectly like comfortable suit killing people. Like it's so
to a
terrible.
Guy who had to fight gladiators in these water cooled suits, right? Like on top of it too.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's just deeply upsetting.
He also mentions the idea that like maybe Felix was better than I thought. Like maybe Felix is one of the best. I mean, this guy's bad. Like clearly these kids are not good. The worst that he's ever seen. in terms of the Palatine class, but he also flips it on us. Maybe Felix is really, really damn good. And so he gets to impart not only wisdom that he gained from Felix, but he also from his time in Colosso. He also makes a note that Dorian has had this like ability to be ambidextrous, which is a pain because not only like if you pick a side and you have like a dominant hand, then you only have to learn what's one set of footwork. But if you're ambidextrous, you have to learn both sides. And that's a very interesting thing because theoretically it's going to be harder at the beginning, but longer term it would be more beneficial to be ambidextrous. But it's frustrating from Hadrian's perspective that he has to spend double the amount of time trying to train this kid.
And for those that have no like combat sports experience or anything like this kind of like both sides things actually matters. I trained jujitsu for years and wrestled for several years, and like most of my ability is doing things on a specific side. Like that's like a very normal, and so you end up with a lopsided, like you could give your opponent an advantage by the fact that you do things in a particular way routinely. So it is an investment, but there is an actual advantage to being able to switch and get out of people's comfort zones and stuff.
After an hour of them training, Gilliam Vas enters into their training yard. Also, like they're training on like grass, and Hadrian's got bare feet on this grass, so their training conditions are like way better than the freaking Myrmidons ones. Gilliam greets them and then like looks at Hadrian and is like, "Wait, what?" Like he keeps seeing him. Like this villain keeps seeing him. He's like, "What are you doing here? And why are you waving swords at the young masters or whatever?" And he's like, "Hey, your reverence." Like he's being very polite. He said, "They've asked me to instruct them on fencing, but I'll leave if you want me to." And the kids are like, no, of course not. Gilliam has come to pick them up, presumably for a lesson or for something prayer related or whatever. But in doing so, he pulls Hadrian aside and says, like, "What is it that you're doing here?" So Gilliam's being an inquisitorial like figure. He's not an official inquisitor on behalf of the Chantry, but he is doing his part as an advisor to the court in buffering the Mataro house to Hadrian, because Gilliam also does not understand the full weight of the situation, because Hadrian is hiding from the Chantry and it's dangerous for the Mataros to let the Chantry in on what's happening here, because theoretically that would mean the death of potentially Hadrian or even more people.
What's interesting about this is people that are paranoid tend to find out lies because they're sort of intuitively paranoid and they're like sort of seeking like the weirdness. And Gilliam is suspicious, and maybe for like the wrong reasons, but like he has the intuition that something is off. Like there's something about the situation doesn't make sense, right? Yeah. He's commenting is like, "Listen, I first saw you in the bottom rung like slave level of the Colosseum, and you are now tutoring the children of the Count of Amesh."
Yeah,
there is something about this situation that is not making sense. Other people are sort of like casually accepting it, but Gilliam is just like, this is not adding up. Like, what are you doing? What is wrong?
Which Hadrian sort of postulates, or why Gilliam could be thinking this way or that concerned about this situation. And he gives a few potential reasons. One interesting one is that he's protecting the Palatine class, even though he is the example of the impropriety of the Palatine class. He sort of calls out the hypocrisy of like the fact that it is inappropriate for Hadrian to be having this much favor, and everything should be done the right way, by the fact that this is an intus who, by all social standards of the empire, should not exist. But he's very polite. This is a different Hadrian. He's explaining to him like, "Look, I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to be here. I really don't have a choice." And Gilliam still buffers against him and says, "Hey, you're being too familiar with these kids. Like, don't be improper with them." And Hadrian immediately is like, "Proper? Oh, sorry. If you think that I've done anything, touched Anais the wrong way, I assure you I have no intention of doing so." Which we know, based on earlier in the chapters, like that's exactly what she wants. But Gilliam clearly does not want that. And then we wanted to read page 351.
It's 351
in particular.
351 was this commentary of kind of what you were saying is, what was Gilliam to them, or they to Gilliam? Was this court puritanism only that? The protection of Palatine blood from the lowborn humanity Gilliam perceived me to be. He was Palatine, but marked by his affliction, less than a homunculus in many ways. Often I found that in such outsiders cling hardest to those labels that are denied them. Thus weak men are the most aggressive and unskilled ones loudest to boast. Gilliam was Palatine, so the fact that he thought I was not was important to him. It was petulance and little more. Sort of this, I thought it was interesting and worth reading because it's this.
Oh, so can we pause there? It's different in this portion of it, just slightly at the end, which gives some more clarity.
Go ahead.
Gilliam was not Palatine, not truly. And so the fact that he thought that I was not was important to him, situated as he was at the perimeter of that highest caste, placed there by his defects. He had appointed himself its gatekeeper and raged against any he perceived as assaulting its walls.
Yeah. It's that is actually better. Rocchio is good. I'm really glad that he did this. It's interesting because it sort of speaks to, we've had, some discussion about this previously, but there's this like sort of inferiority feeling that people can sometimes have. And so they require this sort of reinforcement because they feel threatened consistently because they're like right on the edge of something, or because they feel insecure, their status is on the table to be challenged, right? And so he sort of feels this instinctual need to like reassert the boundary because frankly, if the boundary falls, he's fallen far. Like he's got so much to lose. And even though he's got a point here, like to try to reinforce, like he is on to something that is genuinely going on, it may be reinforced by this like sort of need to reset the social structure because he's the gatekeeper, like Rocchio says, he's got to maintain the status because it's very important to him.
I want to take a moment to think about Gilliam's mindset here for a little bit. Clearly, he is written as a villain on the page. Like he's a barrier to our narrator and our hero, or I guess our POV in most of the cases. Outside of Hadrian's perspective of Gilliam, we don't really get much context in how intists are thought about or like treated in society. This is the first intist that we've met. We know that they are like, I don't know, there is a shame that becomes somebody like this. But honestly, Gilliam has done nothing wrong. It's his mom that decided to try and have a child outside of the confines of the high college. So Gilliam is a product of his parentage and his parents sinning, not anything that he did inherently. So is he not kind of also doing this because the only way that he remains in his position is to be this safeguard? Despite the fact that the system is like violently against him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like he almost has to be like a valuable instrument in order to like keep himself useful, because that's the thing.
That's right.
Like, yeah. It's also interesting, like you could imagine, this is not on the page, but it's sort of interesting to postulate about. Be interesting to think about if one had an intist, right? So like his mom, for example. You can imagine, already the Palatine class had this very distant relationship with their children, but if your child became the sort of like the visual representation of your shame because you decided to do this, almost like the intist gets some of it, but you get it as well, right? Because you participated in this. I could almost imagine that going from not even just uninvolved parents to cruelty in some sense, and it'd be really interesting to know if that played out in this way, where he's not just created by the way that society treats him, but maybe by the way his parents treated him or his mom treated him because of the being the object of this shameful thing. So it's interesting. It's Gilliam's a really fascinating character, right? One of the best characters in this book, actually. He really is, just jumps off the page for me.
Hadrian mentions to him that like, hey, look, dude, if I could be on the first ship out of system, I would.
Yeah.
But your count, Bailey Mataro, is the one that wants me here. And Gilliam's like, well, Count Mataro doesn't do everything 100% right. Like everybody else at court may accept you, but I won't. And explain why you were in the bottom of the freaking, like, why were you going to see the Cielson? Because this is a crucial point too. If Gilliam's a member of the Chantry, and we already have seen the fact that one, there was a Chantry, he was involved in getting the Cielson on planet. We already have had other indications as well that the Chantry are a buffer against the Cielson in the world, with Eusebia talking about the fact that like she's very hawkish against the Cielson earlier in the book. These two forces are diametrically opposed, the Chantry and the Cielson, and they're very suspicious of anything Cielson related because it's heresy. So Gilliam is doing his job here when he's asking Hadrian about why you were going to see the Cielson. And Hadrian even mentions it on the page that, you know what? He's kind of right. Like, there's no answer that I could adequately give him that would satisfy this. Me just talking to the Cielson at all is going to get me accused of being a spy for the enemy. And there's nothing I can really do to rectify that.
This is sort of what I mean as well by the sort of like the sort of paranoid instinct, because he is questioning the situation. He's wrong about the accusation in some sense, because the weirdness about the situation with Hadrian and the Cielson, the operative part is not that he went and talked to the Cielson. The weirdness comes in truth with how he got out of that situation by the Count giving him this position and letting him off the hook but Gilliam is fixated on that because it's weird. And so there's an interesting distortion here where Gilliam is on to the fact that there's something suspicious here, but he's fixated on the wrong part of it. So there's truth, but it's an inaccurate identification of what's wrong. This is sort of what I mean by like the paranoid instinct gets onto something, but is not always right about the particular thing that they are getting onto. It's not actually, it's unproductive to lie to folks like these if you can help, because you're going to trip up on one of these things that are going to pick up and you're going to end up getting caught because they have this innate sense for it. But the details are typically wrong because you make assumptions about things you can't possibly know, right? So it's interesting.
He mentions that like you even going to see the creature is an incredibly grievous sin, one of the 12. Like, what could you possibly learn from the beast? And Hadrian's like, well, you know, it might be worth trying to understand the only other spacefaring race that exists in the galaxy. And he's like, heresy, how dare you? Mankind is the only one meant for the galaxy. And he's like, I wanted to go to see with eyes unclouded. I mention the eyes unclouded because I think this is a direct reference, and if it is, it's also fantastic, to Ashitaka in Princess Mononoke. So Hadrian sees himself potentially as, and he's already indicated this earlier in the book, like he wants to understand Xenos in general, but the Cielson in particular, he already speaks their language. He wants to understand the way that they think, the way that they do things, the way that they interact. He wants to see with eyes unclouded. Ashitaka in Princess Mononoke is this young prince who gets exiled from his land because he gets cursed, and he doesn't want that curse to spread to his village. And he travels all the way across the country and then is basically in between these forest spirits fighting against industrialized man, and he is there to see with eyes unclouded. That's his destiny according to the fates whenever they, you know, cast bones or whatever. So that's his whole thing, is to like bridge the gap between industrialized man and where they're doing things right and where they're doing things wrong, and nature and where it's doing things right and where it's doing things wrong. Hadrian wants to be put in that position kind of with the Cielson. He wants to understand the way that they're thinking. He wants to end the war. He wants to like figure out ways in which he could, maybe with the right situation, he could solve this centuries-long problem if only people were to sit down and talk and discuss.
Yeah.
With eyes unclouded, which means no Chantry, no Cielson, somewhere in between, right? He wants to be the in-between. And he's also trying to explain to Gilliam's like, what the F do you mean, eyes unclouded? What do you mean? You know, he's just cannot give up the idea that this is all blasphemy. Gilliam's like, there's nobody who could challenge mankind in space, period, full stop. And there's literally a ship in orbit that is coming from the war that is replacing soldiers and fixing itself. And Hadrian's like, well, what do you think about that? What's up in there? Gilliam's like, I hear you speak their evil tongue, their vile tongue. Hadrian's like, I don't speak very well. And he's actually being truthful here because he speaks like a kid. Gilliam basically leaves him saying, stay away from them kids. Stay away from them kids, you creep. And saunters off. And then Hadrian calls back at him, hey, Gilliam. And he like thinks about 5 things to say. All of it was Intis related. And he's like, that's not a good idea. It's like, don't assume you know everything. Like, I don't know. I guess trying to call out the fact that he's Palatine and you're not. Like he's trying to dig at him a little bit. But man, it's kind of a lame way to leave the situation. I think Hadrian thinks it was cooler than it was, but it didn't strike me as very cool coming off the page as we end chapter 51.
It's a real call out. You know, Gilliam is off on some stuff. He's making assumptions and stuff like that. But you know,
He's pretty darn close. He's
he's
pretty darn close.
he's sniffing up the right tree. For sure.
Yeah. He doesn't know how close he is, but he's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
But then we begin chapter 52, Little Talks. Hadrian says, yeah, I didn't think about Gilliam very much after that. And he still continued to be the tutor and the trainer for the Count's kids, right?
Just
like
completely disregards. Instantly,
I mean, he really doesn't have a say, right? He does
Yeah.
not have a say. If the Mataro kids want him there, if Bailey and Mataro wants him there, he has to be there. Gilliam doesn't understand that, but Hadrian does.
Yeah.
He is prepping them specifically for an ambassadorial trip from the principalities of Jad. So it's pertinent that he continue to train them in Jadian language and custom and all this different stuff, which is interesting because Hadrian himself has never met somebody from Jad before, but he's heard so much about them. We get some world building that the principalities of Jad were once part of the Imperium, but they rebelled against the throne 9,000 years ago and won their freedom and their genetic destiny. So we know that they have removed themselves from the cycle of the High College to some degree, and in doing so have been able to create clone armies that they use to fight in battle. And Hadrian even mentions, and this is Hadrian, the product of eugenics, mentioning this. Let's keep that in mind. That they embrace eugenics to the nth degree. So this is in a nation of the Supermen, Ubermensch, to the highest degree, while also being this interesting. We already know that they wear masks at court. We know that they are inherited. We find out here that they're inheritors of the Mediterranean. Christopher Rocchio has said, imagine Persians and Italians together made a society of swordsmen, and there you have the Jadians.
They have these legendary sword masters called how do you pronounce this?
Myskolos is the individual, Myskoloi for the multiple.
It sounds like a Jedi or something. It just sounds sick, right? It's cool, super cool.
Yeah, so a Myskoloi is a reminder for anybody from the lexicon is any of the legendary swords masters of Jad drawn exclusively from the Iali caste, credited with superhuman speed and skill. So not only are these supermen, these are super swordsmen as well. So they breed these superheroes and then teach them the best ways of the sword. He mentions the fact that he and Valka have been spending more time together, and the fact that she's the first person that had gotten this tiny little glimpse into who Hadrian Marlowe is, not Hadrian Gibson, and she had not cast him out, which is giving him even more reason outside of the shared mutual interests or the academic side of things and intellectual discourse that they have to go and hang out with her. He would often go to her door and then knock on it, and then they would go walk around the halls because they can't go out of the castle together. She can, but he cannot.
Yeah. So there's a line that I thought was really interesting, which was that she had seen me and she had not despised me. There's this idea in a particular therapeutic modality that is interesting. It's called Gestalt therapy, but the idea is that what is sort of healing for people is genuine contact with other human beings. And what that is this idea that when we interface with other people, oftentimes there is sort of a little bit of a performance that is not genuine that is going on between the two people. Someone's insecure about something, so they hide a thing, or they behave in a way, or they mask something with humor. They're hiding part of themselves with some behavioral strategy to protect themselves emotionally, and therefore that prevents them from making actual contact with other human beings, and people do this to protect themselves emotionally, essentially. But if you do that, then you don't get genuine connection with people, right? You don't actually get to feel like you have real friends because no one actually sees you because you are hiding underneath all of the stuff you're doing. It feels like to me part of what's happened here with this line and over the course of their relationship as they continue to talk is that Hadrian is gradually able to show part of the real person Hadrian, and it isn't met with criticism from his father. He gets to show a passion for this thing, and he's not criticized in the room for that's inappropriate or this is blasphemy or you're a bad kid or something like that. He talks with this person who sees him in a genuine way, and because of that, she doesn't disapprove of it. She actually kind of agrees in a lot of ways. So he gets to have a real connection in a really profound way. and sharing that interest with another person. So it's really fascinating is that he gets to have his guard down so that he gets to actually connect because he's not criticized while his guard is down.
This doesn't help him in his like down badness for sure. He goes to her room again and he knocks at the door and is like, "Hey, Dr. Andera, Valka." Like keeps tapping at it a few times. And you would think that like after 2 or 3 times, you'd have the propriety to just leave.
Right. Yeah.
Just go back to your room. Hadrian does not. Turns the knob and finds out that it's not locked and like steps into the room. It says Valka. And he sort of on the page gives us an explanation. Oh, there's so many brownouts, Brownouts have been so regular. Who knows if they left the door unlocked or maybe she left it that way. Of course, I'm going to come in and make sure that she's okay. It's just he needed an excuse to go outside. But he decides to go in to the room and
it's a mess.
Even in the low light. Yeah, the room is completely messy. And in the moment he's like, this girl that I thought is his first time inside of the room. This girl's like really messy and it kind of bothers me a lot because Hadrian's very clean, very disciplined, very organized. The fact that Valka is not at all. He mentions that he was forced to reevaluate the doctor to remind myself that at one end of my private affections was a person and at the other end the dream of one, which is a very, very interesting way to talk about the fact that we put expectations on other people, especially in romantic relationships.
Yeah.
That like unspoken, unrealized expectations of people that will buffer against reality pretty common.
And I think I think a lot of us have this fantasy about like this perfect person or something like that we're going to be in a relationship with, and you get into a relationship with someone and they're like a person and flawed in all of the ways that people are. And I think, if you carry that fantasy into relationship, you are like doomed to be disappointed by the human being that's in front of you. And I really appreciate this because, you could like paint this picture of Valka as like this, hyper assertive, intelligent doctor and stuff like. You could very easily make this person appear flawless, giving this person something like she's kind of messy.
Pretty messy.
Pretty messy.
As a messy person, she's pretty messy.
She gets excited and like maybe like she just like doesn't organize things and stuff gets scattered everywhere. And she doesn't. It humanizes this character because it gives this character like a genuine like flaw, and it makes this person feel real. Frankly, it makes this person feel like more than a character. Like if there was nothing wrong with this person and she was just badass lady bucking the system or whatever, she wouldn't feel real in the way that she does because she has this. I also just appreciate that our character has to grapple with something that's a flaw of something that he cares about, and to observe that and start to gradually digest and accept that.
I'll say this. There's a lot of online discourse like, oh, the characters in Sun Eater aren't as good. Hadrian's so amazing and such the best character or whatever, but all the other characters suck. Anybody who thinks that is not reading enough into what is going on here.
Yeah.
We've gotten in 3 chapters, we've gotten a really interesting picture of Valka. She is not a medical doctor. She is a xenologist, somebody who studies xenos. She has theories that are alternative to the mainstream. She is brusque and independent. She's also extremely messy. She is thoughtful and funny and all this different stuff. And we've gotten that in 3 chapters of the book. And these are 2 puzzle pieces that ain't fit together. So they're not together right now. So I don't know how. And Gilliam Vas, like you mentioned before, I don't know. Anybody who thinks that the other side characters that aren't named Hadrian Marlowe in this series are not well written have not actually spent the time reading what is actually written on the page.
Yeah, slow down.
Go read it again.
Yeah, slow down. I agree. And that's partly a criticism of myself, frankly, because I didn't read. I read too fast, actually, the first time I read this, and
same.
I don't know why, but I think that with a slower read and a closer eye, there's more depth here than I think is given credit for. I agree.
It's partially my fault. I kept saying, "Hey, when are you going to finish that freaking book? Hurry up!" So I was done months before you, but it's fine. So as he's entering the room, he's like, "Valka, hello." And then finally he sees her like kind of like getting dressed or whatever, disheveled. And she's like, Hadrian, how'd you get in here? And he's like, oh, the door wasn't locked. I didn't know if you'd left it that way or if it was the power. They really ought to do something about this, the brownouts, these diplomatic apartments. And if these doors are coming unlocked, then it's going to be a bad deal. And she's like, well, it's fortunate that I've got a young man like you bursting into my room to defend me, which is so funny because she's digging at him right here. It's like, dude, come on.
I thought Hadrian was dead in this moment. The fact that the fact that she says it this way, I was like, she's crazy into this guy, right? If you had I mean, this is insane. As he's walking in, he's like trying to say like hello, and she's not responding. I'm like, bro, you're a crazy person. You're like walking into her room, and she just makes a joke about it, and she just lets it go, which is super cool. It speaks to her character that she's able to drop it for Hadrian at least.
I'll give Hadrian some credit. It sounded like they had planned to meet up at this time.
Yes.
So he's not completely unexpected at this time. Inside of her room while she's disheveled, you find out that she's hungover, right? Like essentially she's been drinking or something like that. Like her eyes had been askance, and then she notices Hadrian, which is interesting. I want to go back there and see if there's anything that we can pick up. Where is it? She was dressed in this moment. Her eyes were closed, but Hadrian doesn't know if she's asleep or whatever. It seems like she's hungover or drunk. She needs water. She goes to get it. Hadrian has barged in on a hungover woman in her apartment and still manages to end up staying there for an extended period of time. So props to him. But man, if she didn't like him at all, then it would be a very, very bad situation. So he apologizes, recognizing his error of his ways, and she says that she'll let it go. And they immediately start talking about what interests them, which is these, the Cielcin or like the Xeno language stuff. So he mentions, have you ever seen Cielcin Udaritanu? I patted myself down, remembered belatedly that I had neither a pen nor journal with me. There were some examples mixed in with the portraits and landscapes and illuminated quotations that were my custom. And she is still hungover, and she's like, come again? He's like, they're writing. Do you have a... And then she immediately pulls out a pen because she's an academic, throws it at him, and he catches it without thinking, and then sits on the edge of the couch and then begins, finds a loose sheet of paper. Like, hey, can I write on this? And so this is a very fun scene. This scene would be in the movie, I think.
Yeah.
Hadrian pushing a boundary, but also them discussing like the language, him drawing, you getting a picture of who Valka is outside of, just cool, badass chick. He mentions their age difference here. She's older than him. The Tavrosi in particular do have some sort of genetic modification similar to the way that Palatines do, but not exactly the same. And by Hadrian's estimation, not as good. But she could be like, we don't get an indication at this moment of how much older she is than him, but she could be like, she doesn't look that much older than him, but she could be like 50, 60, 100, and he's, 24? So he's a kid to her. He's a kid to her. And so I get this feeling that she kind of looks at him like a kid. His excitement is amusing. She's impressed with him when he can come up with all these put the two and two together that took other people decades to figure it out. But it strikes me in this moment that she doesn't see him as necessarily the way that he sees her. Does that make sense?
Maybe so. I would say, her sort of being amused by his excitement about stuff gives me like the vibe of like, they share this interest, so it's not completely the same, but it gives me the vibe of like me like getting excited explaining the summary of a book I'm reading to my wife, and she's like quietly smiling at me, like because she's like amused that I'm excited about something, but like doesn't
Wives
really.
Are the best, dude.
I know. So what would we do without him, right? So that's the sort of vibe I get, is like she's just sort of like amused by Hadrian and like him just getting really into and excited about the thing. It suggests, like maybe a little distance, but like she likes Hadrian clearly.
Yeah, she enjoys spending time with him for sure.
Yeah. He asked her like why she was sitting in the dark, and then she mentions like the tides will retreat, which is an interesting connection, right?
Yeah.
Does that imply that she's like upset that she might be leaving soon? Like I don't know if that's the connection there, or if she's skipping past and changing the subject to something else? I actually don't quite know.
It's hard to read her in the situation.
Yeah.
Why she would be, presumably by your estimation, drinking because of that.
Yeah.
Is it, man, I cannot wait, this sucks being here? Or is, man, I'm leaving behind something that I care about? It's probably a mixture of both. We don't really get an indication.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's explicitly, but Hadrian does like get worried of like, when are you going to come back or whatever? And she mentions that, like I'll be back for some time and then back, she'll be continuing down this cycle. So, but soon is not necessarily as soon as like it means on other places she mentions. So it's probably both. It's probably complex. And then she catches him staring at her as she's slamming back this water.
And
she mentions that she gets headaches, and that it's really, really nothing. And he's like, "Oh, can I get you anything?" He's like, "In my own apartment? Chill out. Come on, dude." She's like, "It's my place. Chill out." And then that's when he catches her saying, "You're staring." And he apologizes. And then, he just is caught in her beauty or whatever. And he's trying to talk, but he really can't. He's wondering what information to let out, whether it's, the chantry. Like he's holding back a little bit, but he can't, because he can't tell her literally any of who she is. She can only see Hadrian Gibson for now. And she's gotten a little peek into Hadrian Marlowe, but he wants to, in this moment, just tell her everything. But he also knows that he's in the Count's apartments, and presumably they have no privacy. So he can't really do anything about it. So he flips the subject and asks if she likes it on Imesh. And she's like, "Things are pretty different here than where I'm from." And he's like, "Well, okay, do you want to go back home?" She's like, "Shit, no, Xenos are over here. Why would I want to go back home? Like, I study xenology for a reason. Like, I got to go where the Xenos are." And we get an interesting thing here, specifically that, like, Xenos in the Tavrosi Demarchy are treated as equals, like, as part of the equals. So we have sentient beings that are, like, I don't know if you call them domesticated, but integrated in society way more than we've seen any of the Xenos integrated here, which there's some short story action or some continued Sun Eater action available right there. What do the Xenos in Tavros act like?
They have like a bar and they like play the flute, the space flute or something like that, like a Mos Eisley cantina. This is another connection point between her and Hadrian, like where like, Hadrian wants to go out in the universe and, explore, and he doesn't want to go back home, right? And it sounds like she's very similar, right? Her mission and her calling is out in the universe, not on Tavros, right? So it's another connection point for them.
This is the point in the story that we had brought it up early in the episode about background on how Tavros as a society works, with each person having an equal weight of their own share of the vote. She also they continue talking about they bring it back to the Umand and how the Umand's language develops and all this different stuff. And she compares the Umand songs to a little better than what the ancient dolphins had. Just as a note, the dolphins, I don't know if did you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
I haven't.
Or seen the movie?
I've seen the movie, but I don't recall any of the details. I've got it on my shelf. I need to read it.
Dolphins are an apt comparison in this case because they interact in a similar way. And it's indicating that these Umand are pretty intelligent. They're not dogs. Like, dolphins are very smart.
I think they were previously compared to whales, right? Like they're implied.
It sounded like whale song and elephants previously, right?
Right.
This is another checkbox in the, okay, these are more intelligent than we're letting them out to be. Even though they communicate a bit differently.
I agree.
Specifically, I do wonder if the dolphins are a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide. Probably not. But
there's this interesting section that I thought was worth reading, that like as she starts to talk about the dolphins, she starts off, "That's a fair comparison. They're cleverer than dolphins, perhaps only because they can use tools. Do you know?" And she stops talking, and Hadrian says, "Have you ever seen someone speak of something that consumes them, that lights them up from the foundations of their soul?" Valka spoke with such fervency that I forgot myself for a time. Whatever animosity she felt toward me upon our first meeting seemed to have mostly evaporated, vanished into hesitant respect for me and for my situation. And I feared her. I feared what she represented, and that I cared for what she thought of me. I feared the secrets I was made to carry, my name, my blood. I feared that she would think me false. My respect for her work. It's almost like he's staring at her amused now and admiring her, and the idea of like just watching someone you care about be swept up in like something they're excited about life about. It's just a joyful experience seeing someone experience that. This is like what it feels to me to be like truly like, and love is maybe the wrong word, but it's like to just truly appreciate a person, to just be like energized by them being excited about life or something like that. It's the experience. Just their connection is just very good. It's just very, very good.
Genuine.
Their chemistry is really, really good on the page. Just really appreciate it. And he managed to flip storming into someone's room unannounced to dinner. So
yeah,
good job on
impressive.
Hadrian's smooth criminal.
I think to your point, it is love. I mean, you could do that for a friend to be excited for them, but it's different when it's a romantic love, right? Like there's a calling to a pulling on the heartstrings that happens.
Yeah.
When that is genuine, that is different than me being excited for you being excited about something that I don't necessarily share the same interest.
There's something that's sort of brilliant too about the way this is described, you know, like where she starts to talk about something and is excited about it, and it sort of fades into his internal admiration for her. That's like almost exactly what it feels like when you're experiencing it. Like, you know what I mean? Because like you like as you're
you won't be able to remember what it actually is.
No,
but you can remember the way you felt.
You can start to feel that feeling rise up in you as they start to. It's exactly how it feels. I don't know how. It's probably just because Rocchio's been in love. I don't know if he was in love at the time of writing this, but it feels like exactly what it's like to be listening to someone you love talk about something they're passionate about. So it's just very well written. I really like this section.
I am so excited. So they end up going out to eat, and he turns it into dinner. And not only does he turn it into dinner, at the very end of it, after they've eaten, and I love the pitchy tone when he asks her out to dinner too, because it's like, you want to go out to dinner with me? It's very like we get a very human side of Hadrian in this portion of the book, but also a promise that they'd speak again tomorrow. So this is the beginning of something, right? This is if we look at the meta narrative of what we've seen so far, we should expect some tension going forward in the future, because Anais is not going to like what's happening here on this page, right? She lays claim to Hadrian and is trying so hard to get him to look at her boobs. And Hadrian only wants to hang out with Valka. Like, only wants to hang out with Valka.
Talk about tentacles and aliens. Yeah.
And many, many more things. But that's where we will end our episode today. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. And we will continue on, always forward.
And always down.
And we will see you folks next time.
See you folks.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 50, 51, and 52 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2026, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us. And remember, rage is blindness.